Hello, welcome back. Today in this module we will be talking about the treble clef and clefs in general, but specifically how the treble clef works. So now that we know the names of the notes and we know how they function on the piano keyboard, we are in a position to start actually reading music, and that will allow us to see notes placed on the staff, on that 5 horizontal line animal that we've been talking about. So before we can start, we need to take a look here at our note anatomy really briefly. And on screen I've got a picture of the parts of the notes that we need to know about. The head is the round part, much like people, the round interesting part at the top, usually at the top, sometimes at the bottom. And the stem, as we can see, the stem goes either direction. It can go up and it can go down, and we'll talk about why that is later. But the tail-looking part of the note is the stem, okay? So it's the head of the note that's going to give us the pitch that we're talking about, and that's still the focus of our exploration today, is further clarifying the arena of pitch. So we can place notes on any staff, and we can do so on either lines or on spaces. Here on the screen I have a few notes laid out for you on lines, or excuse me, on spaces, and I'm going to put a few more notes on lines. For example, let's do one more. Okay, so we can see that the head of the note, and we do call it the note head, is positioned either on one space or on one line for all of these examples. So let's see, 4 spaces, 5 lines, that gives us a total of 9 notes. So that's all the notes we have. Well, no, not necessarily. Now we can put a couple of notes above and below the staff. So on this third line here, I'll show you what it looks like to have a note right above and a note right below the staff. Okay, so here now at the very bottom we can see that the spaces, as it were, the spaces of our staff extend to these, just hanging on to the top and just hanging on to the bottom. Now we can also extend the lines of our staff, and we'll see how that's to be done. So if we need more notes in the piece of music than we're writing than the 9, or I guess in this case the 11 notes that would be offered to us by either having them on a space or a line of the staff itself, then we're going to use yet another line, and that's called a ledger line. So let's see what a ledger line looks like. There's one below, there's one above, and if we need higher or lower notes, we can just keep on adding ledger lines, and you'll notice that the notes will be placed either on the line itself, like the 2 examples we have here. Kind of zoom in on them. So there are 2 notes on ledger lines, and we'll look briefly at notes that would end up, say, between ledger lines, kind of like this one or this one. Okay, so there are a few notes, as it were, between ledger lines. Now we're never going to find them literally between a ledger line. As you can see, we only use as many lines as we need, and then simply allow the note head to sit on top like that. So ledger lines can extend the staff up and down. Now, you might have guessed already, and you may already know actually, that as we talked about the piano keyboard, as we move further to the right, our notes get higher. I'm moving right, and as I move to the left, the notes get lower. We can hear those pitches descending in that case. Well, on the musical staff, as you might imagine, as we move vertically in space, higher and higher on a line or a space, the pitch that we're assigning is going to get higher and higher. And as we move vertically lower, of course, the pitch will get lower as well. Okay, so with that background, we are ready to talk about clef. Now, we have this 5-line staff. More or less, it's acting like empty graph paper at the moment. It's a handy resource where we can write stuff down and keep it organized, but it's not really organized in itself just yet. Just like when we're doing math, say if we're going to plot some kind of graph, we have to draw the coordinates, the axes of x and y, right? Well, the same thing is true here in music, and what we're going to do is use the clef to define one of the lines or spaces of the staff, and it's the clef that tells us, which note is which. So let's drop a clef onto our staff here. Now we're using, as you know, the treble clef. That's our subject today. So I'm going to add a treble clef to this music, and there it is. We can see it there at the left-hand side of each line of music, the left-hand side of each staff. And it's good to remember that when we're writing music, if we end up writing it by hand, that treble clef, or whichever clef we use, rather, is going to need to appear at the left-hand edge of every line of music as a reminder of what the clef, of what the staff actually means. So, the treble clef, it's kind of a fancy symbol. I'm sure you've seen it before, if not on music itself, then on music-like decorations. It's very common to see. But what is it actually telling us? Well, the treble clef is actually a sort of stylized letter G, meaning that long, long ago, it literally was the letter G, and it was defining the second line of that 5-line staff as the note G. And over time, it got fancier and fancier and more decorative. But that's still what it's doing today. It's telling us where the note G is. So, the treble clef covers a lot of ground here, vertical space, but what we're most interested in is where the clef wraps around, where this tail finally ends up down here at the bottom. And it's that second line of the staff that is the letter G. The note G, rather, I should say. And remember, whenever we're counting things in music, we count from the bottom up. So when I say the second line of the staff, I mean the second line from the bottom. So, knowing, first of all, that the second line from the bottom is the letter G and the note G, and knowing that we have 7 letters in our musical alphabet that run A through G and then repeat themselves, we can assign names to the rest of the notes on this staff. And we can do that by counting down and by counting up from G. So let's do that here. I've got the screen up. Let's go ahead and add letter names to all of these notes. We'll start right here. If you'll bear with me for a second, we'll add the letter G below that note. And that's what we were just saying. Second line, that's a G. So the note right below that G, the pitch immediately below, would be on a space, and that would be the note F. So let's make an F. There he is. So we've got that note labeled. Now if we were to work our way through, we could figure out all the rest of these notes, lines and spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and drop them in right now. The second space is A. The third space is, whoops, I goofed that up, didn't I? Come on. Okay, so there we've got all the names of the spaces. Excuse me. So as you can see, they spell the word face, which is a really handy way of remembering which note is assigned to which space on the staff, counting from the bottom: F, A, C, and E. All right. Now, if we look at the lines, all the notes which occur on lines, we'll notice maybe not a word, but a helpful pattern. So here at the bottom we have an E, 2 notes below F as 2 notes below G as we count backwards in the alphabet. The line above G, we find is the note B. The line above B is D, and the very top line of our staff is F. Where'd my F go? Oops, messed that up somehow. Okay, so now we have names on all of the spaces and on all of the lines as well. All right, so EGBDF doesn't necessarily spell a word like the word face on our spaces, but you may have heard this little mnemonic device which can help us remember, and it is every good boy does fine. Another one might be every good boy deserves fudge. And it doesn't really matter what words you assign to that sequence as long as you can remember the sequence itself. So we have names for the spaces and names for the lines now on our treble clef, now that we've defined it. So what happens with the rest of these notes, the notes that I have on the third and on the fourth line of this example? Well, we would simply continue the pattern. If at the very top line of our staff we had an F, then the note right above that top line would be a G. And if we had an E as the first line of our staff, then the note on the space, the rather empty looking space just below that first line, would be a D. So there, as you can see, I have labeled G and D as those notes, and we would of course simply count our way through all of them. So this note here is a C. This guy here is A. And this guy way up high is another C. All right, so we can simply count our way up and down as we get beyond the limits of the staff and into the realm of ledger lines. We simply continue the pattern and keep counting our notes in that same order of A through G and starting back over. So, let's see. Now, one special note that we need to point out is here at the bottom, and I'm going to try and draw something around him. On this third line, we're going to find a very special note, and here we have C. There, I've made a little bracket next to this C. Now this is a special C. I'm zooming way in on it. This note C, one ledger line below the treble clef, we call middle C. So in fact, let me go ahead and change his name. Come on. Oh, I'm so far in I can't see my box. So not only is this a C, but this is middle C. Now why does that matter? Well, middle C makes a wonderful reference for us, and it's called middle C because if we look at the piano keys, maybe you'll be able to see my keyboard here off to the side. If we look at the piano keys, we have a lot of C's. And the one in the middle of the keyboard we call middle C. Okay, so it's sort of like the middle geographical landmark, if you will, for the whole keyboard itself. And on the clef, we've seen where it exists, one ledger line below the treble clef. So middle C matters because when we sit down to read music and we find any note in any position, we need to know, well, which G is it? How close is it to middle C? Where does it fall? And middle C will act as a good reference for us to find those notes. So for example, let's find a note that we have found, or that we have several versions of. And we talked last time about the octave and how each note name will repeat itself at a higher level. So up here on the first line, the very first note we notated was F. Now looking back here, on the second line, the last note that we wrote down, the top line, is also F. So if we were going to play those at the piano keyboard, we would need to know not only that they are both the note F, which we remember is just to the left of each group of 3 black keys, but we would need to know which F to play on the piano. Well, first of all, we know that both of those Fs are above middle C because they occupy vertical space higher on the page than middle C. The second thing is, if we look at our first F, back up here, the first note notated on the page, we'll notice that it's rather close to that middle C. It's really only 4 notes away. Middle C being 1 ledger line below and this F being on the first space. Well, so we know from that we are talking about a lower F than any of its higher versions, simply because it's close to middle C. Now, look back to that second F on the second line, the last note of the second line, and we'll notice that it's rather far away from middle C. Not only is it rather far away, being at the very top of the staff, there is another F in between. So we can go our way up the staff counting how many Fs or how many Gs or how many As away from middle C our note is to be found. And that's how we're going to know which note it is that we're playing. So, with this background, with this information about the staff, you are ready to start reading notes on the staff and applying pitches to an instrument. Pretty exciting, I'd say. Last of all, let me just point out to you a good way to draw not middle C, but to draw the treble clef. Okay, so I'm going to pull up some empty staves on screen here. There we go. And I'm going to try to draw this as best I can, although my finger here is kind of clumsy. So, if we're going to draw a treble clef by hand, the best way to do that is to start below, create that sort of backwards J that loops upward. Oh, goodness, you can't even see it. There we go. So we have a sort of backwards, oh no, that's not a backwards J, that's a regular J. So we create a J that loops upward, and then we're going to loop the J back down to here and wrap it around. Get a little thinner choice of pen here and try this one more time. So the J comes up, it loops around, comes back down and around. And that's how we would draw the treble clef. Okay, that's all the information for today. That ends this module on treble clef, and I'll catch you next time.